What if the very things you've been sharing with people are the same things slowly weakening your position in life? Not your skills, not your opportunities, but your information, your emotions, your plans, your silence broken at the wrong time to the wrong person. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: most people never question, not everyone around you is qualified to understand you, and even fewer are capable of handling what you reveal about yourself with integrity. You've been taught to be open, to be expressive, to be transparent, but no one taught you the difference between being open and being exposed. No one explained that every piece of personal information you give away becomes something others can interpret, remember, and sometimes use, consciously or unconsciously. And without realizing it, people overshare their goals, their weaknesses, their good intentions, and even their emotional pain, thinking it builds connection, when in reality, it often removes control. Because once something is said out loud, it cannot be taken back. Once someone knows where you're going, what you fear, what affects you, or what matters most to you, they no longer need to guess. They begin to observe. They begin to respond differently. And sometimes, they begin to position themselves in ways that are not in your favor. This isn't about fear. This is about awareness. Because the most powerful individuals in any room are not always the loudest, the most expressive, or the most open. They are the ones who understand timing, the ones who understand restraint, the ones who know that not everything valuable should be shared immediately, and not everyone should have access to every layer of who they are. So before you continue watching, ask yourself one question that most people avoid. What parts of my life have I been giving away too freely, without realizing the cost? Because by the end of this video, you may start seeing communication, trust, and even silence in a completely different way. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong, and they don't even realize it's costing them their future. You feel this urge to talk about what you're going to do. You want to tell people about the business you're planning, the transformation you're working toward, the version of yourself you're becoming. And it feels productive, almost like you've already taken a step forward just by saying it out loud. But psychologically, something subtle and dangerous is happening in that moment. The brain doesn't clearly distinguish between talking about progress and actually making it. When you share your plans, you receive a small dose of validation, approval, encouragement, sometimes even admiration. And that emotional reward tricks your mind into believing you've already earned something you haven't yet achieved. So your urgency drops, your discipline softens, your hunger fades just enough to slow you down, and most people never connect the dots. They wonder why they felt so motivated at the beginning and then lost momentum without any clear reason. But it's not just internal, it's also external. The moment you reveal your plans, you expose them to other people's limitations. And most people don't respond from a place of vision. They respond from a place of fear, comparison, and their own unfulfilled ambitions. They project their doubts onto your direction. They question your timing, your ability, your strategy. Not always directly. Sometimes it's subtle. A raised eyebrow, a hesitant tone, a passive comment that lingers longer than it should. And even if you think you're strong enough to ignore it, your mind still registers it. It plants seeds. It introduces hesitation where there was once certainty. Worse than doubt is silent competition. There are people who won't discourage you. They'll study you. They'll observe what you're planning, how you're thinking, what direction you're moving in. And while you're talking, they're acting. While you're explaining, they're executing. You've turned your vision into public information, and now it's no longer just yours. Powerful people understand something most overlook. Not everything needs to be shared in its early stages. Because early stages are fragile. Ideas are vulnerable before they're built. Plans are weak before they're tested. And when something is fragile, exposure doesn't strengthen it. It threatens it. There's a reason seeds grow underground first. There's a reason foundations are built before anything becomes visible. Growth requires a period of invisibility, a phase where the work is happening without applause, without interruption, without interference. And that's where most people fail, not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack restraint. They talk too soon. They reveal too early. They seek recognition before results. And in doing that, they trade long-term success for short-term attention. Silence, on the other hand, is not emptiness, it's focus. When you stop announcing your plans, you redirect that energy inward. You remove the noise. You eliminate unnecessary feedback. You create space for clarity, for execution, for discipline. You begin to move differently, more deliberately, more strategically. You don't feel the need to explain yourself because you're too busy building something that will eventually speak for itself. And when the results finally show, they carry a different weight. Because they're not followed by promises, they're backed by proof. Understand this clearly. You don't lose opportunities by staying quiet about your plans. You protect them. You don't become invisible, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. So the next time you feel the urge to tell someone everything you're about to do, pause for a moment and ask yourself a better question. Am I sharing this to create progress, or am I sharing this to feel progress? Because those are not the same thing. Keep your vision close. Let it develop without pressure. Let it grow without interference. And most importantly, let your actions carry the weight your words never could. Because in the end, the loudest announcement you will ever make is the life you build in silence. Now let's talk about something that requires honesty, because most people underestimate how exposed they really are when they do this. Revealing your weaknesses. At first glance, it seems harmless, even necessary. People will tell you that sharing your struggles builds trust, that being open makes you more authentic, more relatable. And in the right context, with the right people, that can be true. But the problem isn't vulnerability itself. The problem is misplaced vulnerability. Not everyone who listens to you is listening to understand you. Some are listening to categorize you. Some are listening to remember you. And some are listening to figure out exactly where you can be influenced, interrupted, or controlled. When you reveal your weaknesses too freely, you're not just sharing information. You're transferring leverage. Think about how human behavior works in conflict or competition. People don't always attack your strengths. They look for your pressure points. They observe where your confidence drops, where your certainty wavers, where your emotions become visible. Because that's where influence is easiest. And once someone understands your weak points, they don't need to overpower you. They just need to press the right area at the right time. This is why discretion is not secrecy out of fear, but awareness out of intelligence. When you openly share your insecurities, your doubts, your fears with the wrong individuals, you are essentially giving them a map. Not everyone will misuse it, but you cannot control who will. And that uncertainty alone is enough reason to be selective. Because here's the reality: people remember what makes them feel powerful. If someone learns that a certain topic unsettles you, or a certain situation affects your confidence, they may not act on it immediately, but it stays in their mind. And in future interactions, whether intentional or subconscious, they may test it. They may bring it up casually. They may use it in a subtle remark, a comparison, or a moment of tension. Not always out of malice. Sometimes out of instinct, sometimes out of curiosity, but the effect on you remains the same. Your emotional state becomes easier to predict. And predictability, when combined with access, creates vulnerability. This is why strong individuals don't broadcast their inner fractures to everyone. They understand that not every environment is safe for full transparency. They choose carefully where to open up and to whom. Because true vulnerability is not about telling everyone everything. It's about telling the right person the right thing at the right time. There's also a deeper psychological layer to this. When you constantly express your weaknesses outwardly, you begin to reinforce them internally. Every time you verbalize doubt without resolution, you strengthen the identity attached to that doubt. Over time, what you repeatedly say about yourself can start to shape what you believe about yourself. So, if your weaknesses become your identity in conversation, they risk becoming your limitations in behavior. On the other hand, when you keep your awareness internal and focus on addressing your weaknesses privately, something different happens. You shift from expression to improvement, from explanation to execution. You stop describing the problem and start solving it. That doesn't mean you deny your weaknesses. It means you manage them with intention rather than exposing them without purpose. Because strength is not about pretending you have none. Strength is about knowing them, working on them, and deciding who, if anyone, gets access to that information. There is a difference between being open and being exposed. One is controlled. The other is careless. And in a world where information travels fast, where conversations are remembered, repeated, and sometimes reshaped, what you reveal about your vulnerabilities can follow you longer than you expect. So before you share, pause and evaluate. Ask yourself, does this person need to know this? Do they have a role in helping me grow, or are they simply present in my life? Because trust is not something you give away freely. It's something people earn over time through consistency, respect, and integrity. When you become more intentional about who you open up to, you don't become distant. You become protected. You don't lose connection. You gain control over your own narrative, and that control matters. Because the less people know about where you're fragile, the less they can interrupt where you're building strength. Guard your weaknesses not out of fear, but out of discipline. Share them wisely, not widely, and invest your openness in environments where it leads to growth, not exposure. In the end, the goal is not to hide who you are. It's to make sure the right people see the parts of you that matter at the right time, under the right circumstances. Because once your weaknesses are understood by the wrong people, they stop being just weaknesses and start becoming opportunities for others. And the moment you remove unnecessary access, you regain something far more valuable: control over yourself. Now let's address something that feels positive on the surface, but carries a hidden psychological shift most people never notice: the need to talk about your good deeds. On the outside, it seems natural. You help someone, you do something kind, you make a sacrifice, and you feel the urge to share it. Maybe to inspire others, maybe to express pride, maybe just to be seen as someone who does the right thing. And in a world that often overlooks quiet effort, it's easy to understand why people lean into recognition. But here's where it becomes important to pause and think deeper. The moment you start announcing your good deeds, the motivation behind those actions subtly begins to change. What was once driven by principle can slowly become driven by perception. You start to become aware of how your actions will be received, how they will sound, how they will be interpreted. And when that awareness grows, it begins to influence your decisions. You may still do good, but now part of you is also thinking about how it will be acknowledged. And when recognition becomes part of the equation, something essential gets diluted: purity of intent. Because true character is revealed not in what you show others, but in what you choose to do when no one is watching and no one is going to know. There's a psychological difference between doing something good and needing others to know about it. One builds internal integrity, the other builds external image. And while both may look similar from the outside, they come from very different places internally. When you keep your good deeds private, you remove the expectation of return. You remove the subtle desire for praise. And in doing so, you allow the act itself to stand on its own. There is no performance attached to it, no audience required to validate it, no reaction needed to justify it. That kind of behavior strengthens something inside you that is far more valuable than recognition: self-respect. Because self-respect grows when your actions align with your values, not when your actions are acknowledged by others. On the other hand, when you constantly share your good deeds, you may begin to rely on external validation to feel fulfilled. A compliment, a like, a comment, a reaction. These can become small forms of reinforcement that your mind starts to expect. And over time, that expectation can quietly shape your behavior. You may find yourself choosing actions not purely because they are right, but because they are visible. And once visibility becomes a factor in your decisions, you are no longer fully operating from integrity. You are operating partially from audience. This is not always intentional. Most people don't realize it's happening, but awareness changes everything. There is also another subtle dynamic at play. When people consistently hear about the good you've done, they may begin to interpret your identity through those announcements rather than your actual character. Ironically, the more you talk about your goodness, the more it can come across as something you are trying to prove rather than something you naturally embody. Whereas those who quietly and consistently do good often build a different kind of reputation. One that is discovered over time rather than declared upfront. People begin to trust their actions because they've seen patterns, not because they've heard claims. And that kind of trust is stronger. It's built on observation, not persuasion. It's also important to recognize that silent generosity has a different internal reward system. When you do something good without telling anyone, the satisfaction you receive is internal. It's clean. It's not influenced by reaction, comparison, or acknowledgement. It reinforces a sense of personal alignment. You did the right thing, and you know it, regardless of whether anyone else ever finds out. That builds a quiet confidence. A confidence that doesn't depend on being recognized to feel meaningful. And in the long run, that kind of mindset keeps you grounded. It keeps your intentions clear. It protects your character from becoming dependent on external feedback. None of this means you should never express gratitude or never share meaningful experiences. The point is not to eliminate expression. It's to understand intention. Are you sharing to inspire, or are you sharing to be seen? Are you expressing to connect, or are you expressing to be validated? Those are very different motivations, and being honest about them can help you stay aligned with who you want to be. At a deeper level, the most impactful individuals in any field are rarely the ones constantly talking about their contributions. They are the ones whose work speaks consistently enough that it doesn't need explanation. Their behavior creates trust over time, without requiring them to advertise every positive action. So instead of building a pattern of telling people what you've done, focus on building a pattern of being someone whose actions naturally reflect your values. Let your kindness be recognized through experience, not announcement. Let your generosity be felt, not broadcast. Let your integrity be observed, not performed. Because in the end, what truly defines you is not what you say you've done, but what remains consistent when no one is keeping score. And the less you need to tell people about your good deeds, the more those deeds begin to define your character in a way that words never could. That's when you move from seeking recognition to embodying reputation. And reputation built in silence is one of the strongest forms of credibility you can have. Now let's talk about something that most people misunderstand at a very deep level, because it's tied to emotion, ego, and human psychology all at once, revealing how much someone has hurt you. When someone betrays you, disrespects you, or crosses a boundary, the emotional impact is real. It registers internally. It lingers, and in many cases, it's natural to want to express that pain, to explain it, to process it, to make it understood. But the moment you express how much it affected you to the wrong person, you are no longer just communicating. You are disclosing your emotional leverage, because pain is not just an experience, it's information. When someone knows what hurts you, they learn what matters to you. When they understand what destabilizes you, they gain insight into what can shift your emotional state. And in the wrong hands, that information can be used, not always immediately, but strategically over time. This is where awareness becomes critical. Not everyone who causes harm will intentionally exploit your reaction, but some will notice it. They'll observe how you respond, how quickly you react, how deeply certain words or actions affect you. And once that pattern is visible, it becomes predictable. And once it's predictable, it becomes something that can be triggered again. Not necessarily out of hatred, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of curiosity, and sometimes simply because they know they can. That's why showing someone the full depth of your emotional reaction in the moment of conflict can sometimes shift the balance of power in the interaction. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you regulate how much of that internal experience becomes visible to others. There is a difference between feeling something deeply and expressing it fully to the wrong audience. When you reveal the extent of your hurt too openly, you risk turning your emotional state into something external that others can observe, interpret, and potentially influence. And once that happens, your internal world is no longer fully private. It becomes partially accessible. Strong individuals understand that not every reaction needs to be displayed, and not every feeling needs to be exposed in real time. This doesn't mean you deny your pain. Denial is not strength. Awareness is strength. But awareness includes the ability to choose when, where, and with whom you process that pain. Because healing is not something that requires an audience. In fact, healing is often more effective when it is uninterrupted by outside opinions. When you are constantly explaining your hurt to others, you may find yourself reliving it instead of resolving it. You begin to narrate the experience repeatedly, which can reinforce the emotional intensity rather than reduce it. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you don't immediately express how much something affected you. You create space between the event and your response. And in that space, you regain control. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond intentionally. Instead of broadcasting emotion, you process it internally. And that internal processing allows you to approach the situation with clarity rather than heightened emotion. It allows you to evaluate what actually happened, what it means, and what boundaries need to be adjusted moving forward. Because in many situations, the most powerful move is not to show how deeply you were affected. It's to adjust your behavior in a way that prevents it from happening again. That's where real growth occurs. Not in the expression of pain, but in the transformation that follows it. There is also a long-term perspective to consider. When you consistently reveal how much things hurt you, people begin to associate certain topics, behaviors, or interactions with your emotional sensitivity. Over time, this can influence how they interact with you. Some may become more careful, which can be positive, but others may become more calculated, knowing exactly how to engage with you to produce a reaction. And reactions, when visible, can become patterns. Patterns can be studied. And anything that can be studied can be anticipated. That's why emotional restraint is not about suppression. It's about control. It's about choosing not to give away more information than necessary in moments where you are emotionally charged. Because the moment you step back and regulate your response, you regain authority over your emotional narrative. You are no longer defined by how someone else's actions made you feel in that moment. Instead, you define the meaning of the experience through your own processing, your own reflection, and your own decisions moving forward. And that is where personal power is rebuilt. Not in hiding pain from yourself, but in not allowing others to dictate how that pain is displayed or interpreted. So instead of asking, how do I make them understand how much they hurt me? A more powerful question is, how do I handle this in a way that protects my peace and preserves my control? Because the truth is, not everyone deserves access to the depth of your emotional responses. Some people only need to see your boundaries, not your breakdown. Some situations only require your adjustment, not your explanation. And some forms of pain are best processed privately, where your thoughts are clear, your emotions are stable, and your decisions are not influenced by the immediate need to be understood. In the end, the less you reveal about how deeply something affects you, the more control you maintain over how it continues to affect you. And when you learn to manage your reactions instead of displaying them, you shift from being emotionally reactive to being emotionally strategic. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because the person who controls their emotional exposure controls the terms of their own power.